19 keys, and this is high-level conversation. Library.
So when we look at which group has, the worst statistics in America, from cancer to violence, right? Second is suicide, gun violence, prison, of course, that's black males, right? So for me, if I was to look at a way to make America better, you have to look at the people who's affected by the worst statistics in America. Now, we are in the middle of Mental Health Month, right? And with black men having such skyrocket mental health issues in America, if you want to begin to fix the issue, right, you have to first deal with the mind. And that means there has to be, especially when you talk about prison reform, right? And you have to decrease the incentivization for these corporations, right, to do things that keep black men specifically going to prison. Because if you don't decrease that corporate incentivization, then there's always going to be mechanisms, right, where people figure out how to make a profit, right? And black bodies are seen for mechanisms of profit. They always have. So for me, it's like there has to be new laws and new components of people, of everything that you just laid down was a beautiful case, right, of all of the adversities and atrocities that black men or the black community have faced of. This is why America has to focus on, all right, what do we give back to this community for the redlining, right, for the Tuskegee, for all of those different things, but there's never been compensation. The numbers of black farmers that have lost their land, right, it gets up to $300 billion. Right? When you look at the amount of land that is owned by black people today, it is minuscule in comparison to whites today. And when we look at the opportunities that we're giving back in the day, because there's a lot of it is correction. When we talk about equality, it's like giving everybody the same thing. But when you start from a deficit already, so it's equity versus equality. And then that's when, how do we go and fix the things, right, that have been broken specifically by America? And so I look at Governor Gavin Newsom, and he laid out a reparations task force. And the reparations task force wasn't even about slavery. It was about everything that happened in the last 100 years, right, that has caused this stress and this trauma on the community, and how black people were deserving, right, of compensation for those things. And it's not something that black people will ever give up. Like, we just don't get our reparations. That would be a stain on America's moral system forever. And that karma cycle will never end until that particular thing is fixed. So I would say first, mental health clinics. Dr. Amos, which is somebody that I listened to, he had a TED Talk, and he was talking about how we talk about mental health, but it's really brain health, right? How trauma changes the brain, right? So if you wanted to go into black communities and you wanted to help black men, you would put a lot of these facilities, right, that are able to get you these brain scans to see where this trauma is, and then they put you on a brain program to help fix you. Because there's one thing to give a person an opportunity, but when your mind is already messed up, you can't even focus to take the opportunity because you're cycling on the problems that you just went through, right? And so we are generations in, right? We're not a generation that you get to start fresh and let's move forward. It's like there's a lot of things that have to be fixed. And poverty-induced stress and trauma, right, creates this cycle of different health effects to where you have all of these issues, and then you can't even afford to go get them fixed because you don't have money. So the very thing that causes your problem keeps you in the cycle of the problem. You talk about, medical racism, right? And we dealt with, there's environmental racism in the sense that if you look at some of the zip codes in America, some of the worst, air quality, right, or where they're black populations. So there's so many different things that we have to fix. And I believe the quality of solution has to be based on the depth of awareness of the problem, right? So for me, I look at it in multiple ways, but going and just fixing the education system is one thing, but fixing that family system, right, has a deeper understanding. And I don't think that there's no candidate that's going to address it. What I believe is, let me pin a point.
Okay.
What I believe is the smartest thing that a candidate can do, especially when it comes to the black community, is to directly work with grassroots organizations that's already fixing a problem that needs funding, right? America usually chooses to say one side of black America is safe. You're going to see who gets invited to the White House, who they work with, blah, blah, blah. But it's usually the radicals that create the most change, right? And so there has to be a different approach because there's too much bureaucracy when it comes to change that they do all this R&D, they throw all this money, right? But we don't see any change. And that's because they're not connected to the people that actually make a difference, right? And so it will really be saying that, would you be willing, right, to then allocate those funds to people who actually doing the work? Because I don't expect RFK, because you're going to have, if you were elected, you would have a plethora of problems, right? And so your office and your cabinet rather would have to be filled with people who know, live, experience, and solve those problems. So there's direct allocation and budget to people, right? Or the brain trust of Black America that knows how to solve his own problems. Because we're not looking for a savior, right? The goal is to help us save ourselves. And usually that looks like getting out our way, right? Because naturally we're always fighting to better ourselves. We're not victims, right? But we're fighting multiple wars while trying to recover from the last one.
Yeah, so let me just tell you how I think about this. I been an environmental attorney for 40 years. My first case and my primary focus for much of that time was on environmental racism, and I spent 20% of my time representing indigenous American Indians in Canada, the United States, and Latin America. In treaty negotiations and litigation, addressing a lot of the issues that you just talked about affecting Black community. My first case as an environmental lawyer was representing the NAACP in trying to stop a waste transfer facility that was being sited in the oldest Black community in the Hudson Valley in Austin, in New York, and I won that case. But I learned a lot during that case that, because this was a middle class community, it wasn't poor, but it was being placed there because they didn't have the political power to kick it somewhere else. And this is true all over. In my experience, I'll give you some examples. What I learned then is that 4 out of every 5 toxic waste dumps in America is in a Black neighborhood. The largest toxic waste dump in America is Amil, Alabama, which is 85% Black. The highest concentration of uncontrolled toxic waste dumps in America is the south side of Chicago. The most contaminated zip code in California is East LA. There are, probably one of the biggest health crises in this country is 44% of urban Black children have lead contamination.
Yeah, my brothers have lead contamination.
Yeah, and that is rife with causes all kinds of learning disabilities that put you at disadvantage and behavioral disabilities and violence and all of these. I sued the city of New York one time. The city of New York has 3 water systems. It has the Delaware system, which comes from the Catskill Mountains, the Catskill system, which comes from the Catskills, pristine water, and then it has a very bad water system called the Croton system that's coming from a heavily populated area in Westchester Putnam County. There are 102 sewer plants dumping into that water. And I asked New York City, show me the distribution maps. Let's see who's getting the bad water. And for a year, they refused. This was long before 9/11, but they said it's national security. So it was just a baloney answer. Finally, on the courthouse steps, they gave me the distribution maps, and I saw that the bad water was going to Harlem, the South Bronx, Lower East Side, Hell's Kitchen, right? Mm-hmm. They were poor communities, mainly communities of color. On the Upper East Side, coming down from Harlem, there was a little tiny dot in the sea. The Croton distribution was colored dark on these maps. There was a little tiny, like one house that was getting good water from Catskills. I had to get out a magnifying glass and look at it, and it turned out to be Gracie Mansion, which was the mayor's house. So they had put special pipes into the mayor's house to give him the water, but all of the communities around him were bad. So I saw this from the beginning of my career. I knew about, about medical racism already. My uncle ended the Tuskegee experiment. As you know, Tuskegee experiment started in 1972, and they took 600 Black men. 400 of them had syphilis. They didn't tell them they had syphilis. They bribed them by saying, we're going to give you free hot meals, and they were sharecroppers from Alabama. And then for 40 years, they didn't treat them because they wanted to see syphilis was always treated with mercury. And they didn't know whether people were actually dying of mercury poisoning or whether they were dying of syphilis. They didn't know what syphilis did to you if you just let it go. They wanted to figure it out, so they decided to get these guys and not treat them. So this is in 1932. In 1940, a lot of those sharecroppers tried to join the U.S. military, and the CDC went to the military and said, don't have, because when you go into the military, the first thing they do is they give you what's called a short arm inspection, where they check you for syphilis, and then they cure you. And CDC didn't want them treated. And so they weren't allowed to join the military. They didn't know why their applications were refused. And then in 1947, penicillin was invented, and it became a treatment that could knock out syphilis in 5 days. And they made sure none of them got access to it. And they kept it going till 1972, when there was a black public health service official named William Jenkins, who went to my uncle's office, and another white man called Peter Buxton. They told my uncle about it. He had hearings in 72, and he put an end to it. So I was very aware that on the medical and environmental, that, Black communities were systematically being victimized. And I spent, much of my life dealing with this. Now, today, you made a really important point, which is the health impacts in Black communities. One of the reasons for that is these are food deserts. They're getting bad food. They're 100%. Getting processed food. And they're being mass poisoned by it. Right now, when my uncle was president, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, 60% do. And the amount with Black Americans is much higher. And that level is going up because of mass poisoning, because there's 1,000 ingredients in our food that are illegal in Europe. The autism rates have gone in from one in 10,000 in my generation. So today, 70-year-old men, 1 in 10,000 has autism. A kid's generation, it's 1 in every 34 kids, according to the CDC, 1 in every 22 boys. And it's higher in Black communities. And during COVID, we had the highest death rate in our country of any country in the world. We had 16% of the COVID deaths, and we only have 4.2% of the world population. And the highest levels were American Indians, and then the second highest were American Blacks. American Blacks were dying of COVID at a rate of about 3,500, 3,200 per million population. In Haiti, 80 miles south of Florida, the death rate was 14 people per million population. They don't have good food. I mean, they don't have a lot of food, but they don't get the processed food. And the processed food is what is poisoning us, and the medicated, the pharmaceuticals. And so, my solution to that is, one, I'm going to get NIH to stop making drugs to treat chronic disease, and instruct them, spend their budget, $42 billion budget, finding out exactly the contaminants that are causing and then eliminating them. I'm also, my big Peace Corps program. My uncle started the Peace Corps. He started the space program. My Peace Corps program is going to be wellness farms, rehabilitation facilities that I'm going to start in rural areas all over the country, where any American can go for free, any of them who is dependent on drugs, either legal drugs or illegal drugs, psychiatric drugs, which every Black kid is now just standard put on Adderall, SSRIs, benzos, which are known to induce violence. And those kids are going to have a chance to go somewhere and get reparented, to live in a community where there'll be no cell phones, no screens. You'll actually have to talk to people. And the model for this is a community that I had direct contact with because a family member of mine went there, and it's called San Padrigano's in Italy. That community is a 10,000-acre farm. And they grow organic food, so the kids eat very, very good food for the first time in their lives. They have a bakery, and the kids work in the bakery. They work in a furniture factory. They have an apparel factory. They have a wallpaper factory. They learn a skill. They learn a trade, and they can stay as long as they want for free. And when they leave, they're placed in a job, but they're taught how to be responsible, how to tell the truth, how to show up on time, how to be reliable, how to be a caring member of a community, to reconnect. So many of our kids today are alienated. They're dispossessed. They have no hope for their future, and the suicide rates are astronomical.
Mm-hmm.
Black kids now, they have the highest rate of suicide, and it's one of the highest causes of death among Black youth. We need to give kids back, again, hope in our country, hope in their futures, but also a feeling of community and an understanding about how to live in those communities. Now, I went to this model is an extraordinary model, and my relative who went there had lost all of her diagnoses, and she came out of there an extraordinary person and lives a thriving life now. But I visited recently another program in an urban area that's modeled on that in Salt Lake recently, and it's called The Other Side. It has 300 convicts, also drug addicts, who go there, and it's the same model. And when you go in there, they all own a storage facility, the biggest storage facility in Utah. They own the biggest transportation company. They move houses, move you out of your home, etc. And they own a used clothing store that is bigger than a Walmart. And they work in there. They learn how to show up on time, how to cash a check, how to keep a bank account, how to be a reliable person, how to tell the truth. And at first, when they first started this, they told me they had a hard time placing people in jobs. But now there's a list when you go in on the wall of all the corporations in Utah, hundreds of them, that are dying to hire people from this program, because the people come out of there and they're extraordinarily productive workers. So they get a second chance at life. They get reparented. They understand how to have relationships, how to have intimacy, how to be honest, and have all these work skills, to take care of themselves, to steward themselves and their own lives. They're given sovereignty over their lives. I'm going to start these right now. The biggest industry in rural areas in this country is prisons. They're now mainly private prisons, which are a crime against humanity. And they're doing what you're saying. They're monetizing human misery, right? And they're not spitting out graduates who are now thriving. They're spitting out recidivists who are going to be back a year later. And they're factories for abuse. And they're not. It's not a mechanism for creating wholesome communities and belief in our country and love for our country and love for our communities. And that's what we need to start doing. And the people who are in there because they're convicted of drugs should not be in those facilities. They should be in a place where they're getting treatment, where they're getting training, where they're getting job training, life training, and spiritual enlightenment, spiritual enrichment, because that ultimately we have to be able to induce in people who are enveloped in despair. We have to be able to induce in them profound spiritual realignment, so that they're living on another plane, so that they understand that that God is out there, that He's watching them, that He loves them, and that they have hope for their lives. And that is going to be my major program when I get into the White House, is to reclaim all these people who have been lost.
Thank you for that answer. Nah, I was seriously up all night. You know what I mean? I took a couple of drops of this, and I think I took it too late, right? I took it probably around like 5 o'clock. I didn't think it was going to keep me up to like 2, 3 o'clock. But it was good though, because I was doing hella work. Like, I was knocking it out because I had to do a lot of stuff on the back end for the show. But the disclaimer on this one, don't take this if you want to goddamn be focused if you don't want to be focused all day long, just knocking it out with no distractions. Because my mind was calm. I had my system ready to go. I was energized, and I was just boom, 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 boom. And once I got in that flow, I couldn't be distracted, nor slanted, nor taken off. You feel me? That supermind really have you up there going. It's like Viagra for the brain. It had me definitely mentally up all night, for sure. Because it almost got to a point where it felt like I couldn't tell when I was supposed to go to sleep because I didn't get no drowsiness. But then I realized that once I got into bed, you know, I was able to naturally just fall into a sleep. So it was still good. It wasn't one of the ones that just, you know, had me with insomnia. It would just basically tell me when you want to go to sleep, you can. But beyond that, that supermind had me working. Yeah, this my fix. I don't need nothing else for real.
I'm 19 Keys, and this is high level conversation. The library.